My marriage was less than 6 hours old when my husband put $50,000 in my hands, and before that night was over, I told him I wanted a divorce. 12 years later, I can still look at our wedding photograph in the living room of our home in Madison, Wisconsin, and remember exactly how certain I felt that evening. I was 26 then, Marcus was 29, and after the last guests left, we finally had a quiet moment together. I had changed out of my wedding dress, and Marcus had loosened his tie. He looked tired but happy, the way I felt. Then he reached into his overnight bag and pulled out a plain white envelope. "I have something for you," he said. I laughed and reminded him that we had already exchanged wedding gifts. "This is different." Inside was a cashier's check made out to me for $50,000, along with a short gift letter stating that the money was mine. At first, I thought I had misunderstood the number. "Marcus, is this really $50,000? "Yes." I stared at him. We were comfortable, but $50,000 was not casual gift money to us. It represented years of savings, a substantial emergency fund, or part of a future down payment on a house. "Why would you give me this?" I asked. He took my hand. "Because it's yours. No matter what happens to us." At that moment, I heard those words as devotion. I thought he was telling me that marriage meant sharing everything and making sure I would always feel secure. I hugged him, overwhelmed by a generosity I had never expected. But when I pulled back, Marcus did not look relieved. His expression had changed. He reached into the same bag and removed another set of papers, this one several pages long and clipped together. "There's something else we need to talk about," he said. The warmth I had felt seconds earlier began to fade. "What is that?" Instead of explaining, Marcus handed it to me. I looked down and saw formal language about marital finances and property. Then I saw something that bothered me even more. Marcus had already signed the document. "You prepared this before today?" I asked. He hesitated only briefly. "Yes." I looked from his signature to the $50,000 check and gift letter still lying beside me. Suddenly, the two things seemed connected in a way I had not understood when he first gave me the envelope. I began reading the first provision carefully. By the time I reached the bottom of the page, I was no longer thinking about what $50,000 could do for our future. I was wondering why my new husband had spent the days before our wedding preparing for a future that apparently required protecting something from me. I read the first page again, slower this time, because I wanted to be certain I was not letting one phrase frighten me into misunderstanding the entire document. The proposal did not say that Marcus would control my paycheck or decide what I could spend. It did something more fundamental. It proposed separating much of what we might otherwise build financially during our marriage. Each of us would retain individual savings and investments under the terms we agreed to, and certain future property could remain separately owned depending on how it was purchased and titled. One section used the example of a house. If Marcus provided most of the purchase money from his separate funds, his proposal allowed that property to remain principally his rather than automatically becoming something we treated as equally ours. I stopped reading. "We have talked about buying a house." "I know." "We have talked about saving for it together." "I know that too." His answers were calm, which somehow made me more unsettled. I turned another page. The $50,000 had its own provision. The check was described as an unconditional gift to me alone, and Marcus would have no claim to the money once I deposited it. "So this is why you gave me the money?" I asked. "It is part of it." "Part of what?" "Making sure you have something that belongs completely to you." I stared at him. A few minutes earlier, that idea had sounded loving. Now it sounded like he had divided our future into his side and mine before our marriage had even reached its first morning. "Did you have someone prepare this?" "Yes." "When?" He looked at the document before answering. "Before the wedding." That hurt more than any financial provision I had read. Marcus and I had spent months discussing our life together. We had talked about budgets, careers, neighborhoods in Madison, whether we wanted an older home or something requiring less maintenance, and how much we could responsibly afford. He had plenty of opportunities to say he wanted a formal agreement. Instead, he had let me walk through our wedding believing we had already discussed the important foundations of our marriage. "How long have you had this?" I asked. "Long enough that I should have talked to you sooner." "That is not an answer." "A few weeks." I set the pages on the table. "You had this for weeks, and you waited until after we were married to show me?" "Elena, I was not trying to trick you." "Then why not give it to me before the ceremony?" He started to answer, but I raised my hand. I was not interested in reassurance before I understood what had actually happened. If you wanted separate property, we could have discussed separate property. If you wanted me to have my own savings, we could have discussed that too. I might even have agreed with some of this. But you made the plan first, signed your name, married me, and then invited me into the conversation. His face tightened because he understood the distinction. My anger was not about whether I could claim a future house. It was about being excluded from a decision concerning both of us. I pushed the agreement toward him. "So tell me something honestly, Marcus. If this was supposed to protect our marriage, why did you wait until after I became your wife to tell me it existed?" Marcus looked at the agreement between us, then back at me. "Because I was afraid that if I brought it up before the wedding, you would think I was already planning for us to fail." I could hardly believe what I was hearing. "And giving it to me after the wedding was supposed to make that better?" "No. I know how that looks now. This is not about how it looks." I tapped the pages once. "You decided what financial protection should mean for both of us. Then you waited until I was already your wife to tell me." Marcus leaned forward, but I stepped away from the table. I needed enough distance to think without being pulled toward the version of the evening I had expected. "I thought the $50,000 would show you that I was not trying to take anything from you," he said. "That is exactly the problem. You thought money would explain a decision I never got to participate in." He went quiet. I looked at the check and gift letter again. An hour earlier, I would have called $50,000 an extraordinary gift. Now I could not separate it from the agreement beside it. "Keep it," I said. "Elena, that money is yours." "I do not want it." I slid the check and gift letter across the table with the agreement. "Not like this." His expression changed. Until then, I think Marcus still believed we were having our first serious argument as a married couple, something painful but manageable. I was beginning to understand that my problem was larger than any clause on those pages. "If you believed we needed an agreement, you should have asked me to build one with you," I said. "You did not just wait too long, Marcus. You decided first and invited me in afterward." "I was trying to protect you." "From what?" Marcus did not answer immediately, and that silence settled something in me. I picked up the small travel bag I had packed for the weekend. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Leaving." He stood, stunned. "Elena, please. We can talk about this. We should have talked about it before today." I met his eyes. "If this is how you think marriage works, then maybe we should not be married." His face went pale. "What are you saying?" I had never expected these words to be part of my wedding night, but I also knew I could not pretend the problem was smaller just because confronting it was painful. "I am saying I want a divorce." Marcus stared at me, then at the $50,000 I had refused. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. "This was never about protecting my money from you." That stopped me before I reached the door. I turned around. "Then tell me who you are protecting it from." I kept my hand on the travel bag and waited. Marcus did not try to stop me from leaving. Instead, he sat down again and looked at the papers on the table as if he finally understood that explaining the document was no longer enough. "My mother," he said. I lowered the bag but did not move closer. Marcus had mentioned his parents before, but only in broad terms. I knew their marriage had ended badly when he was a teenager. I had never heard him speak about what happened afterward. "When my father left, almost everything about their life was tied to him," Marcus said. "The accounts, the house, most of the financial decisions. My mother had spent years depending on a system she thought would always be there. He paused, then continued without waiting for me to ask. When the marriage ended, she had to figure out how to support herself while also figuring out what she could actually afford. I remember hearing her make phone calls about housing. I remember her sitting at the kitchen table with bills spread everywhere because she did not understand half of the financial decisions Dad had always handled. His voice remained controlled, but I could hear how deeply those memories had stayed with him. She was not incapable, Elena. She just had not been given much reason to build a financial life that was truly her own. I looked toward the $50,000 check and gift letter. For the first time that night, I could see another possible meaning behind it. Marcus followed my eyes. I promised myself a long time ago that if I ever got married, my wife would never be in that position. She would always have money that was hers. She would understand what she owned. She would never have to stay with me because leaving would mean she could not support herself. My anger did not disappear, but something inside it shifted. So you were protecting me from becoming your mother? Marcus nodded. I thought I was. The words mattered because he did not say that he still believed he had handled it correctly. I put my bag down. Then why all the rules about separate property? Because in my head, independence meant clear ownership. Your money stays yours. Mine stays mine where that makes sense. We decide what becomes shared. Except we did not decide, I said. You did. He looked down. Yes. I sat across from him, not because I had forgiven him, but because I finally understood what argument we were actually having. Marcus had not spent weeks planning how to keep his wife away from his money. He had spent years carrying a frightened teenager's memory of his mother at a kitchen table, then turned that memory into a financial philosophy without ever asking whether it belonged in our marriage. I understand why you wanted me to be protected, I said. But you are still missing something. He looked at me. Your mother lost choices because too many decisions had already been made for her. And tonight, you tried to protect me by making another important decision for me. Marcus said nothing. He did not need to. The contradiction was sitting between us beside his signature. You built protection for a future I never agreed to be afraid of, I said. And before I decide what happens to this marriage, I need to understand how long you have been planning my future without me. Marcus answered without trying to soften it. The idea started years before I met you. That surprised me, but he continued. After his parents divorced, he began treating financial independence as something every adult should protect, especially inside a marriage. When he started earning steady money, he built his own emergency savings and kept learning about property, debt, and long-term planning. Working in commercial property appraisal only reinforced his habit of thinking about ownership in precise terms. But the $50,000 was different, he said. I started setting money aside specifically after we became serious. I felt my chest tighten. How long ago? About 2 years. He explained that he had gradually moved part of his savings into the account and, several weeks before our wedding, sold a small investment to bring the balance to $50,000. The answer was simpler than I had expected and, in some ways, harder to process. Marcus had not acted on impulse. He had spent a long time quietly building what he genuinely believed would make me safer. So while we were talking about our future, you were building this fund without telling me. Yes. And while we were discussing houses and budgets, you were already thinking about what should stay separate. Yes. He did not defend himself this time. That helped more than another explanation would have. I looked at the man I had married that afternoon and understood something I had not understood an hour earlier. Marcus trusted me. I no longer believed the agreement existed because he expected me to take advantage of him. He loved me enough to spend years preparing for my financial security. But he had also convinced himself that loving me gave him the right to define what security should look like before asking what I wanted. That realization made the situation more complicated, not less. It would have been easier to leave if I believed he was selfish. It would have been easier to stay if good intentions erased bad decisions. Neither was true. I believe you were trying to protect me, I said. Marcus looked almost relieved, but I continued. That does not mean I am ready to accept what you did. The relief disappeared, and he nodded. I understand. I do not think either of us should decide anything else tonight. I picked up my travel bag again. This time Marcus did not ask me to stay. Where will you go? I will get a hotel room nearby. Do you want me to call you? No. I need some time where I am not reacting to you, the money, or those papers. He nodded again. All right. I paused at the door. Earlier, I had been ready to leave because I thought my husband had entered our marriage expecting to protect himself from me. Now I knew that was not true. The question of why he had created the money and the agreement had finally been answered. The harder question was what I should do with that answer. I am not promising I will come back tomorrow, I told him. I know. And I am not filing anything tonight either. Marcus looked at me, but wisely did not treat that as forgiveness. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. For the first time since he handed me the envelope, Marcus was no longer deciding what happened next. I was. The hotel room was less than 3 miles away, but the distance gave me something I had not had since Marcus handed me those papers: silence. I slept badly. Woke early, and spent most of the morning resisting the urge to make a permanent decision while I was still angry. Before leaving the house, I had slipped the proposed agreement into my bag. I took it out and read it again from the beginning, this time without Marcus sitting across from me. The financial provisions still bothered me, especially because he had designed them without my participation. But several pages in, I noticed language I had barely registered the night before. The agreement specifically stated that I should obtain independent legal counsel before signing it. It also made clear that I was under no obligation to accept the proposed terms as written. I read those lines twice. They did not excuse Marcus for waiting until after our wedding to show me the document. They did not turn a unilateral decision into a mutual one. But they forced me to correct one part of my own interpretation. Marcus had not prepared a legal trap and expected his new wife to sign it before she understood what she was giving up. He had prepared what he believed was a starting framework, then handled the most important part of presenting it terribly. That distinction mattered. I had accused him, at least in my own mind, of protecting himself from me. I now knew that was wrong. I had also treated the agreement as if its existence proved he expected our marriage to fail. His explanation about his mother made that conclusion harder to defend. The real problem remained serious enough without making Marcus guilty of motives he did not have. I picked up my phone and called him. He answered quickly. Elena? I want to talk. There was a pause. Whenever you are ready. There is one condition. Okay. We are not going to spend another hour arguing about whether I should sign that agreement. I am not signing it as written. That question is finished. Understood. I want to talk about why you believed we needed something like it in the first place, and what that says about the marriage you thought we were going to have. Marcus was quiet for a moment. That is fair. I returned later that morning. The $50,000 check and gift letter were still on the table. Marcus had not touched them. I sat across from him and placed the agreement I had taken with me between us. I saw the section about independent counsel, I said. You were not expecting me to sign without getting my own advice. No. Never. I should have noticed that before I decided what your intentions were. Marcus started to respond, but I continued. That does not change what you did wrong. You still planned something affecting both of us without including me. But if we are going to decide whether this marriage has a future, I need to argue with what you actually did, not with motives I assigned to you. His expression softened, though neither of us pretended the crisis was over. For the first time, we were no longer debating whether one of us was the villain. We were trying to understand the fear that had shaped the decision. I looked directly at my husband and asked the question that mattered now. Marcus, what kind of marriage are you actually afraid we are going to become? Marcus did not answer immediately, but this time his silence felt different. He was not withholding information. He was trying to put into words something he had apparently never questioned. I am afraid we will stop being two capable people and become two people who cannot function without the marriage, he finally said. I am afraid one of us will give up too much control because it feels easier, and then years later we will realize we built a life that only works if nothing ever goes wrong. I understood where that fear came from now, but I also heard the flaw in it. Independence is not the problem, Marcus. I want my own financial security too. What I do not want is for either of us to decide what security looks like for the other person. He nodded. You are right. Then we need something more specific than an apology. I pulled the agreement closer, not to reconsider signing it, but because it represented exactly what needed to change. If we stay married, neither of us makes a major financial decision that affects both of us and presents it afterward. Not a house. Not significant debt. Not a major investment using shared money. Not a change in ownership of something we both depend on. We discuss it before anyone acts. Marcus listened without interrupting. And if either of us is asked to sign something that changes our legal or financial position, that person gets time to review it independently, I continued. No pressure. No assumption that disagreement means disloyalty. I agree. Do not agree because you are afraid I will leave today. He met my eyes. I am agreeing because I finally see what I did. I spent years believing my mother needed more control over her own life. Then I tried to give you control by designing the system myself. That does not make sense. Hearing him identify the contradiction without me explaining it again mattered more than another apology. I also had something to admit. And I was wrong about part of this too. I assumed the agreement meant you expected me to take something from you. I did not stop long enough to separate what you actually wrote from what I was afraid it meant. Marcus gave a small nod. You had a reason to be angry. Angry does not automatically mean accurate. For the first time since the wedding, the conversation stopped feeling like a contest over who had committed the greater wrong. We were finally talking about the kind of marriage we wanted to create. I looked down at the agreement. I still will not sign this. I am not asking you to. Marcus reached for the document, then stopped before touching it. And I do not think I should just tear it up and pretend the whole idea was wrong. That surprised me. What do you mean? I still believe you should have money that is completely yours. I still believe I should have some financial independence too. But this document is my version of what that should look like. He pushed it toward the center of the table. So let us stop treating my version as the answer. We can get independent advice, decide what actually makes sense for both of us, and build something from zero. Together. We did not solve everything that morning, and I am glad we did not pretend we could. The first real change was simpler. Neither of us made another decision alone. Over the next few weeks, Marcus and I wrote down the financial questions we actually needed to answer instead of treating his original agreement as the starting point. We discussed what should remain personal, what should become shared, how we would handle future savings, and what would happen if one of us contributed substantially more toward a major purchase. We each had time to seek independent professional guidance before sitting down together again. By then, the document he had prepared before our wedding no longer felt like something I needed to defeat. It was simply a proposal that no longer represented the marriage either of us wanted. I do not want this version, Marcus said. Neither do I. We rejected the original agreement rather than editing it clause by clause around the same assumptions. That decision mattered because it was the first major financial choice of our marriage that actually belonged to both of us. What replaced Marcus's plan was less dramatic and far more useful. We agreed that we could maintain personal accounts and personal savings while also building shared finances for the life we chose together. Major decisions involving shared money, significant debt, real estate, or ownership affecting both of us would require a conversation before anyone acted. If legal documents were involved, each of us would have time to understand them and obtain independent advice when appropriate. The $50,000 created one final question. What do you want to do with it? Marcus asked. On our wedding night, I would have handed it back simply because accepting it felt like accepting his plan. Now the meaning had changed. You really intended that money to be mine? Yes. That part was never conditional. I thought about his mother and the fear Marcus had carried since adolescence. The lesson he drew from her experience had been incomplete, but not worthless. Financial independence was not an insult to marriage. The mistake was deciding what independence should mean for another person. Then I will keep it, I said. Marcus smiled faintly. Good. But you are going to keep independent savings too? His eyebrows lifted. You are giving me financial rules now? No. I am asking whether the same principle applies to both of us. He considered that and nodded. It should. That exchange told me more about whether our marriage could survive than any grand apology could have. Marcus was no longer trying to prove that his original plan had been reasonable, and I was no longer treating every idea inside it as contaminated by the way he had introduced it. We were choosing what to keep and what to discard together. I did not forget that I had asked for a divorce. Marcus did not ask me to pretend I had never meant it. Instead, we treated that night as evidence of how quickly trust could fracture when one person substituted good intentions for shared decisions. I deposited the $50,000 into an account in my name, and it remained mine. Marcus maintained financial independence of his own. We also began building shared savings for the future we both wanted. I stayed in the marriage not because I discovered Marcus had been right all along, but because he proved willing to change how decisions were made. We had made a better agreement about how to treat each other. Whether we could actually live by it would be tested not by another crisis, but by years of ordinary married life. 12 years later, the clearest evidence that we had changed was not the wedding photograph still sitting in our living room. It was the house around it. When Marcus and I eventually bought our home in Madison, we did not repeat the argument from our wedding night. We discussed the down payment, ownership, monthly expenses, emergency savings, and what each of us wanted before we signed anything. The house became jointly owned because that was the decision we reached together, not because either of us assumed marriage automatically answered every financial question. Over the years, the same rule followed us through career decisions, investments, repairs, and family responsibilities. We did not always agree. Sometimes Marcus wanted more financial caution than I did. Sometimes I was the one asking us to wait before spending money. But disagreement stopped feeling like disloyalty. The $50,000 remained in my separate account. I invested conservatively, added some of my own savings over time, and never touched the original principle. Marcus never asked for statements, never questioned how I managed it, and never treated it as money he had loaned me. It was mine because we had agreed it would be mine. Then, years into our marriage, his mother decided to move. Her home had become more difficult for her to maintain, and she wanted something smaller and easier to manage. She could handle the move herself, but Marcus and I wanted to help with some of the transition costs if she was comfortable accepting it. That evening, I thought about the account that had existed because of her long before she knew anything about it. That evening, I thought about the account that had existed because of her long before she knew anything about it. I want to use some of the investment growth from my $50,000, I told Marcus. He looked at me for several seconds. For Mom? Yes. Elena, you do not have to do that. I know. That was precisely why I wanted to. I was not surrendering the independence Marcus had tried so awkwardly to give me years earlier. I was exercising it. His mother had unknowingly inspired that money because Marcus remembered how vulnerable she had once felt. Now part of what the account had earned could make another transition in her life a little easier, this time without fear controlling the decision. Marcus lowered his eyes for a moment, then smiled. She is going to argue with us. Probably. She might refuse. Then we will respect that. He laughed softly. That answer captured 12 years of change better than anything else could have. We would offer. She would decide. The money no longer represented Marcus deciding what safety meant for somebody he loved. It represented having enough security to give someone a choice. His mother eventually accepted limited help after we made clear that there were no conditions attached. Months later, she was settled comfortably in her new place. One cool fall evening, I stood in our living room and noticed our wedding photograph sitting slightly crooked on the shelf. I straightened it just as Marcus walked through the room. At 41, he was still the man in that photograph, but he was also very different from the 29-year-old who had believed good intentions could substitute for a conversation. I was different too. At 26, I had nearly reduced his mistake to the worst motive I could imagine. 12 years had taught both of us to ask better questions before deciding what the other person meant. Marcus noticed the photograph in my hand. "Still thinking about divorcing me?" he asked. I looked at him seriously for half a second. "Ask me again after our next financial meeting." He laughed, and I did too. Then I returned the photograph to the shelf. There was nothing left to prove. We had not stayed married because one difficult night magically taught us everything we needed to know. We stayed married because the boundary established that night survived the ordinary decisions that came afterward. Perhaps commitment and independence are not opposites after all. Sometimes knowing we are free to make our own choices is part of what allows love to remain a choice rather than become an obligation. Marcus meant well that first night, but good intentions could not tell him what safety meant to me. That was something he had to ask. Over time, I came to understand that trust does not require two people to agree on everything. Sometimes it is simply the confidence that when an important decision arrives, both voices will still matter. The money that once exposed the weakest part of our new marriage eventually became a quiet reminder of that difference. We did not need to give up the ability to stand on our own. We needed to learn how to stand beside each other without deciding where the other person was allowed to stand. If you had been in my position that night, what would you have needed from your spouse before deciding whether the marriage could continue? And where would you draw the line between financial independence and the decisions a married couple should make together?